Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about a very concerning rise in global tensions. Now, I thought I'd start off by looking at this chart, which shows the movement in crude oil prices. This is actually WTI price, not Brent crude. And as you can see, since the start of June, we have seen a sharp increase in oil prices. And actually, they rose by 5% yesterday on the news that the USA is preparing to evacuate its embassy in Baghdad in Iraq. And you might be thinking, well, why has that caused oil prices to move by 5%? Because 5% is a massive movement in one day. That tells us that the oil markets are spooked by this news. So let's hear exactly what's going on.
The United States is pulling personnel out of the Middle East, according to President Donald Trump on Wednesday.
Well, they are being moved out because it could be a dangerous place, and we'll see what happens. But they are been. We've given notice to move out, and we'll see what happens.
Reuters reported earlier in the day that the U.S. is preparing a partial evacuation of its Iraqi embassy in Baghdad, according to U.S. and Iraqi sources, and that Washington will let military dependents leave locations around the Middle East over heightened security risks. It has bases in Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates.
So why is the USA starting to move people out of the Middle East? Well, the obvious answer to that is that there's potentially going to be some sort of conflict starting in the near future. When you have a situation like this where people start being evacuated, it is a warning sign, a red flag that there is definitely going to be some sort of military tension. So things are increasing at the moment. And just to add to that, the UK Navy, which basically acts as a conduit to shipping in the UK. It basically issues advice to shipping if there's a problem. Issued a rare warning yesterday, telling its shipping fleets to be careful in the Middle East. If we go into the details of that, you can see that the statement said, UK MTO has been made aware of increased tensions within the region, which could lead to an escalation of military activity having a direct impact on mariners. The advisory said, vessels are advised to transit the Arabian Gulf, Gulf of Oman, and Straits of Hormuz with caution. We've got two warning signs going up here that something's going on. So what is this? Why is the Middle East starting to become more of an issue? Well, let's hear a bit more detail as to why the markets think that something is going to happen.
Is there anything that can be done to dial the temperature down in the region?
They can't have a nuclear weapon, very simply.
In a podcast interview out earlier in the day, Trump said he was less confident now that Tehran would agree to stop its nuclear program. Meanwhile, CNN has reported that U.S. intelligence suggests Israel is preparing for a strike against Iran's nuclear facilities.
So all of this relates to what's going on in Iran. And I thought it was worth talking about the nuclear situation and how you convert uranium, which is basically the raw material that is the start of the nuclear process, into a bomb, because that's essentially what the concern is at the moment, that Iran has been working on an enrichment process to try to upgrade all of its uranium to weapons grade. And that would basically then mean that Iran would have nuclear weapons, because at the moment it doesn't. So unless you're an expert, or maybe you've seen the film Oppenheimer and you're now a small expert on nuclear weapons, I thought it was worth just touching on exactly what enrichment means, because I'm not sure most of us understand it. So what we've got here are the details, and I've kept it relatively simple because unless you're a chemist, it's quite tricky to follow. So uranium, which is basically found on the Earth, so you can dig it up, which is naturally has nuclear energy within it, and that's the key fuel for nuclear reactors. So if you're building a nuclear power plant, you would need to buy in uranium. So nothing wrong with that. You're not going to come into any sort of conflict just by building a nuclear reactor. However, there are two main isotopes in uranium. U-238, which constitutes 99.3% of uranium, so the vast majority of uranium is U-238. And then we've also got U-235, which makes up 0.7%. And the reason why that's important is because it's fissionable. So you can get those atoms to basically smash together and expand. And that's the isotope that's needed for nuclear power or bombs. And the process of enrichment means increasing the percentage of that U-235. So basically the explosive part of uranium. So power reactors that are used for nuclear power generation, you have enrichment to around 3 to 5%. So it's a lot more than the natural form. It's only 0.7%. So basically, you're increasing it by 7 or 8 times the natural state to get to the point where you can use it in a power reactor. If you want to create a research reactor, so you want to be doing lots of different types of research, you'd need to increase the percentage to 20%. So that's a lot higher than its natural form. And to get to weapons grade uranium, it needs to be 90% plus. So, how do you go about enriching uranium? What do you need to do? Well, the easiest way to do it is to use a gas centrifuge. And this is a picture of the gas centrifuges in Iran, in their facility. So you can see that there are lots of them. It's not just one big central spinning top. There's lots of these happening, presumably under pressure. And uranium is turned into a gas, which is called UF6, not a gas that I'm familiar with. It's then spun at very high speeds, and the U-235 separates from the heavier U-238, and then you repeat this in cascades of centrifuge to gradually increase the U-235 percentage. So that's basically enrichment. So why does it matter? Who cares whether Iran is enriching its uranium? Well, as we've just discussed, in its natural form, it's 0.7%. For power plants, it's 3 to 5. It's 20% for nuclear research reactors. But if you can get to 90%, you've basically created an atom bomb. You've basically got a nuclear weapon. Now, this isn't something that Iran has just started. They've actually been working on this for a long period of time. And I thought it was worth having a look at the last 20 years or so, what's been going on. So back in 2002, it was revealed by Western investigators that Iran was secretly enriching its uranium at a facility in Natanz, which is in Iran. And after some discussions at that time, the enrichment process was suspended. That was in 2003. Now, in 2006, following the appointment of a new president, they started enriching again. And the West obviously wasn't very happy with that. And over the next 9 years, there was a lot of discussion about what Iran was doing and whether or not it should be doing it and whether it had to restrict the amounts of enrichment. And in 2015, it was announced that a deal had been signed, the Iran nuclear deal, that basically restricted the amount of enrichment that Iran was able to do and capped it at 3.67%. So basically that meant it could enrich its uranium for nuclear power plants, but nothing else. It couldn't go beyond 3.6%. Now, in May 2018, which was when Donald Trump took over as president for the first time, he decided to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. So the US pulled out of that, and Iran thereafter started resuming its higher level enrichment. In April 21, it was discovered that Iran had enriched to 20%, so significantly above that 3.67% that was in the 2015 agreement. And it was then moving towards trying to push the enrichment to 60%, which isn't that far away from 90%. And it was reported in May this year that Iran was holding 408 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium. So that's a lot of uranium that's relatively close to weapons grade. Israel is not very happy about this. Israel is a nuclear force, it has nuclear weapons, and it's in the Middle East. And there's been a number of reported attacks on that enrichment facility in Iran. On July the 2nd, 2020, a large explosion at an above ground centrifuge assembly plant took place, and this caused major damage and reportedly set back Iran's centrifuge program by up to 2 years. Now, nobody took official responsibility for that, but at the time there was a lot of speculation that Israel was behind that attack. And then in April 2021, another explosion happened at the same facility, Iran called it sabotage, and the Israeli media and officials indirectly confirmed Israeli involvement. The Israeli government never admitted it, but there was a lot of speculation at the time that Israel was behind that second attack. And there was also another reported attack somewhere between 2019 and 2020 that was less successful, so that wasn't ever documented. Now, in terms of why it's a concern when you're enriching uranium, this chart shows the curve in terms of how long it takes to actually get uranium to go from its natural state of 0.7% up to the weapons grade of 90% plus. And you can see from this curve that actually a lot of the work is at the front end of this process. To move it through the early stages takes a lot of time. It's going to take 10 to 12 weeks. But actually, once you get to the level that Iran is at the moment, 60%, it's only a short space of time before you can move to 90%. And this is the concern at the moment, that Iran is sitting with this large stockpile of 60% enriched uranium, which wouldn't actually take that much effort to move to 90%. Now, in terms of what's happened since Donald Trump became president for the second time, I thought it was worth having a quick look at the time frame for 2025. So you can see that in February, Iran's supreme leader said proposed talks with the USA were not intelligent, wise, or honourable. So he wasn't really showing much interest in negotiating with Donald Trump. Now, following on from that, on March the 7th, Trump said that he sent a letter seeking a new nuclear deal with Iran. On March the 15th, he launched an intense airstrike targeting Houthi rebels in Yemen, the last members of Iran's self-described axis of resistance, capable of daily attacks. So this was an indirect attack on Iran. It wasn't actually targeting Iran itself, but the Houthi rebels are fully supported by Iran. That's who's funding them. On April the 7th, Donald Trump announced that the US and Iran were holding direct talks in Oman, and Iran said they'd be indirect talks but confirmed the meeting. The first round of talks took place on April the 12th in Oman and ended with the promise to hold more talks after the US Mideast envoy Steve Witkoff and Iran's foreign minister briefly spoke together. On April the 19th, the second round of talks took place in Rome. April the 26th, Iran and the US met in Oman for a third time, but negotiations included talks at the expert level for the first time, so it looked like they were making some progress at that point. On May the 11th, Iran and the US met in Oman for a fourth round of negotiations ahead of Donald Trump's trip to the Middle East, and on May the 23rd, they met in Rome for a fifth round of talks, with Oman saying the negotiations made some but not conclusive progress. So what we've seen since Donald Trump has taken over is that there's been an effort to try to get around the table, but we're not really getting anywhere. There's not been any major progress. And what we heard from Donald Trump earlier was that he definitely does not want Iran to have nuclear capability. He wants to stop that. Now, Iran isn't basically signing up to that. What we're seeing here is that they are not keen to get around the table and say, okay, we agree never to do it. They're basically holding off. And I think this news that the USA is now removing people from its embassies and removing families of armed forces and people who are based in the Middle East gives us a strong indication that there is now going to be a likelihood of some sort of military action, some sort of strike, maybe against Iran, maybe against that nuclear testing facility, the centrifuge facilities. We don't really know. Israel is also reported to be thinking or planning an attack on that site as well to stop the nuclear capability. But as we saw from the curve earlier, it doesn't actually take that long to move from 60 to 90%. And I guess that's the concern, is that you don't want to attack those facilities if there is weapons grade uranium already on site, and nobody really knows whether there is or not. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because a 5% move in oil prices in one day tells me that alarm bells are ringing in the markets. People are now very concerned that the tension in the Middle East that's been building during 2025 might boil over into some form of military action. And we've heard from Donald Trump that he's dead against Iran having any sort of nuclear capability. He does not want that to happen. And Iran doesn't seem to be playing ball. They are holding off, stalling, not agreeing to sign up to anything. And as we've seen from the data, in order to enrich uranium to weapons grade, it doesn't take that long. It's only a matter of weeks to move it from 60%, which is where over 400 kilograms of uranium is reported to be at the moment in Iran, to more than 90%, which basically would mean that Iran would have a nuclear bomb. And anybody that's seen the Oppenheimer movie, which is a good documentation of what happened in World War II when there was a race to build the first atomic bomb, you can see that you can do that in a rudimentary fashion. And that was back in 1945. So that was 80 years ago. Obviously, technology has moved on hugely in the last 80 years. So you don't have to create a massive bomb that's going to be moved by trucks these days. You can do things much quicker and much more efficiently. So that's the concern at the moment. The US is worried that Iran is close to being able to develop a nuclear bomb. And then if it did, then clearly that could represent a major problem if Iran decided that it wanted to deploy that bomb. So the US is looking to cut things off before it gets to that stage. But in order to do that, it's likely that some sort of military action is going to take place. So we've heard that Israel is planning an attack on that nuclear facility in Iran, and I'm sure Iran is aware of that. If we know about it, I'm positive that Iran is aware of that. So they will be building up their defenses at the moment and trying to get ready for something that might happen. But in addition to that, the US is now moving people out of the region. And that tells me that there are definitely concerns that something is afoot, something could happen at some point in the near future. And of course, in terms of what the impact of this would be on the global economy, we've already got a lot of uncertainty going on right now because of all of the tariffs and the trade war that's going on between the USA and China. It's reported that a deal has now been agreed, but we haven't seen the final details of that, and we don't know exactly when that's being put into place, what it's going to look like. And also we've got all of the other deals that are up in the air at the moment in terms of the US's deal with the European Union and all of the other countries that are still outstanding. So there's a lot of uncertainty right now. We've got a slowdown in China, which is the second biggest economy. We've talked about that a lot. We're likely to see a slowdown in the USA as well because all of these tariffs will push prices up. So if prices go up, then it's going to reduce the amount of free cash that everybody has, and so they're likely to spend less, and so the economy won't grow as quickly as it would have without those tariffs. So we've already got a lot of things going on that are affecting the global economy. But the last thing that we need at the moment is more warfare. We've got the war in Ukraine that's been going on for more than 3 years. We've also got the situation in Israel, which is continuing to flare up, and that's causing tension. And the last thing that we need is the USA and Iran just to lock horns and get involved in a head-to-head conflict, because that could then erupt into a wider conflict in the Middle East. And I guess that's the concern. That's why people are being moved out of the region. And that's why the markets are jittery and why oil prices have gone up by 5%. And when we see a 5% move in one day, that tells me that people are getting nervous, that something is going to happen that's going to disrupt the global supply of oil, global markets, and the global economy. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative, and thought-provoking. As you may have spotted, I've moved the camera position a little bit, so it's a bit further back, so you can see a bit more of me. You can see my arms. Yeah, I've got some arms. Normally it's just like this, but you can see my arms. I've also dialed down the colour behind me a little bit, so I've taken it down around about 75% lower today. So hopefully I appear a little bit brighter, because what I was finding was when that light behind me was high, it made me dark because it's sort of this lit, the backlight was stronger than the front light. So I've changed that as well. Just thought I'd keep you in the loop on all of this. Hopefully you're enjoying a little bit of this. If you'd like to see more of me just talking and talking about other stuff and expanding the content, then please check out the new Joe Blogs Experience channel. I probably won't keep it called Joe Blogs Experience forever because it sounds a bit weird. I did say it was like the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Somebody said to me it's like the Joe Rogan Experience. I've never watched Joe Rogan, so I can't compare it. But What it is basically is more of me talking about lots and lots of different things, and there'll be all sorts of different content on there. So some of it hopefully will be a lot of fun, because it's difficult to bring fun into this channel. I've tried it. It didn't go down very well. There's a lot of serious people watching these videos. So I've been restricted in terms of the amount of humor and fun stuff I can bring into this channel. But if you'd like to see a bit more of me having a bit more fun and being a bit more off the cuff and talking about some other stuff and doing some really interesting things, I've got a really interesting learning series that I'm going to be starting shortly, which you might be interested in. So head over to Joe Bloggs Experience. Please subscribe there, be one of the early subscribers. Come with me on the journey. Hopefully it'll be a lot of fun. But if you've enjoyed today's video, thank you very much. Thanks for watching all the way through to the end. Thanks to everyone that supported me. If you bought me a coffee or a YouTube super thanks, or you're a patron, a YouTube member, or a buy me a coffee member, thank you so much for that support. And here's something to put a smile on your face.